Hello, everybody. My name is Reed Fisher. I'm a professional marathon runner for Adidas and Tinman Elite. Today, we're going to talk about what it means to be a professional marathoner. So I'm currently building up for the Chicago Marathon, which is October 13th, 2024, if you're watching this in the future. And for the last 3 months, I've been logging over 100 miles per week. I do a 12-week build-up. In that period of time, this build-up, I logged 1,211 miles in the last 3 months in my preparation for the Chicago Marathon. So today I'm just going to kind of walk you through some of the things that I do, some of the reasoning behind the things that I do, talk a little bit about what I do to stay healthy, how I structure my training, what the priorities are for this build, and we'll go from there. So the first thing I do at the beginning of every marathon build, once I've decided what race I'm going to be targeting, is I sit down with my coach. Coach Joan Hunter is the coach of Tinman Elite, and we kind of talk about what we want to prioritize in my build-up. So maybe it's a goal time, maybe it's a goal placing at the marathon, maybe it's just a general feeling of how my build went when we look back on things, and we want to come up with some process goals and some outcome goals so that throughout the course of the build, I've got something that is keeping me motivated, whether it's, a time on the clock at the finish line or just saying, hey, you know what, for this 4-week block, I'm going to try and average over 110 miles per week in the middle of this build. This build up, we really wanted to talk a lot about just building strength and being consistent. That's something that in my past marathon experience, I often will get a little bit dinged up in my marathon training. It's typically 3 to 5 weeks out, kind of when I'm in my peak mileage. A lot of times I'll have, a little bit of a calf tweak or some pain in my foot. I've broken a metatarsal in that foot in the past, so sometimes that's a problem area. So really, the priority this build up was let's stay healthy. Let's do the things that I need to do in between my runs to make sure that I can show up prepared and ready to tackle the training. So we sat down and kind of looked at what that might look like for me, this build up. And one of the things that we talked about early on was building a foundation of strength in my run training early. So in the first month or so of the build up, I was doing a fair bit of double threshold workouts. As we transitioned out of that first phase, the priority was just getting in mileage and accumulating some fatigue in the legs, but not so much that, I was getting hurt or overtired. And then in this last phase of the build, it was really freshen up, feel good, and run quite a bit, faster than maybe I have at other points of the build to get sharp. When you're racing Chicago, really the priority is time. Most people who are running Chicago, with it being a flat course with usually pretty good weather, the priority is walking away with a nice PR. And it's been a few years since I've ran a marathon on a fast and flat course. So for both Coach Hunter and I, really the goal outcome of this build is to walk away with maybe a couple minute PR. My current personal best is 2:10:54 from the Boston Marathon. That's been the plan since day one of the build. Coach Hunter and I have been working diligently to get me as prepared to run that fast over a marathon since. So let's talk about phase one. This is what we'll, in the marathoning world, most of us call kind of your base phase, the building phase of the build. So it's kind of a double whammy. You're building into the build, if you will. So this, for me, is typically about the first 4-ish weeks of a 12-week build. This is when I'm, often just starting to get the mileage back up from a summer break or a down period. So this year I started, right around 95 miles a week for the first week of my build. And as I progressed into the first month, by the end of the month, I was running more like 110 toward the end of that. So really priority number one in the first month or so of a 12-week block for me is just getting the marathon mileage back up, building the long run. We started about 16, 17 miles for my long run in week one. And by the end of the building phase, we were right around 20 miles. So in this build, week one, the very first workout, all of a sudden I felt this weird tightness in my hamstring on my left side. And, it was day one of the build up. I was doing a light workout and made it about halfway through. And was like, man, this just really doesn't feel right. And I feel like I'm doing more harm than good by continuing to run on this thing. So pulled the plug on the workout, went to the pool, aqua jogged for 4 days, got out of the pool, said, yep, hamstring feels pretty good. Let's do, a couple of light runs to make sure that when it gets back to the running mechanism and I'm on land and have the impact of running, it's still a non-issue. And I was fortunate that it wasn't. So I think it's just important to, be proactive. I know as runners, we hate days off and we think, oh, this is what's scheduled. This is what has to get done then. And often we ignore pain or discomfort or fatigue in our body until it's too late. And then it's more of a catastrophic injury. I've learned over the course of the last 5 years, of being a marathoner, oftentimes, I've learned the hard way that you have to be really in tune with the difference between fatigue and pain and discomfort and injury. And I think the more you can start to recognize the delineation between the two and just get ahead of those things, the less problematic any potential risk for injury becomes. Coming out of the first phase of the marathon build and into phase 2, which is what I call just the kind of the grind phase of the build. It's when you're at your peak mileage weeks and you're sustaining that for quite a bit. This is typically when I do a tune-up race. So for me, this go around, I ran the US 20K championships on Labor Day, which was 5 or 6 weeks before race day. And that's pretty typical timing. I look for a tune-up race 4 to 6 weeks out from race day. I find that's enough time for me to feel fit enough on the front end of the build that I'm excited and ready to go race and be competitive, but I'm not so close to the race that if I go do this tune-up race, I'm not going to be recovered in time for the marathon itself. So for me, this year it was New Haven road race, which was the US 20K championships. I went and finished 6th overall there. Felt pretty solid, all things considered, running on tired legs. I ran over 100 miles that week of the race. Body came off of it really well, so I was able to recover quickly and then jump my mileage up into that kind of grindy portion of the build. So I found sometimes when I'm training up here at altitude, 54-ish, 100 feet here outside of Boulder, it's easy for me to feel like I can handle over 120 miles a week. But then when I do that for a week or two, I just start to feel like I'm a little bit beat up. So instead of maybe saying, let's have 1 or 2 really big 120 plus weeks, the goal this time was to have more weeks over 110. So I had about a 4-week block where I was at or over about 110 miles a week, with the biggest week being about 116. Yeah, it worked really well. My body's been healthy. I haven't had any cross-training time that wasn't planned. Everything's been smooth. Workouts have been great, and I've felt like this is a good kind of strategy for me to stay healthy moving forward. Is total volume of the marathon maybe stays the same, but it's spread out a little more evenly across this 4 to 6 week peak phase of the build. So a lot of times these workouts start to get into the really long sort of steady state efforts. So kind of the hallmark workout of this peak phase was a 12-mile tempo in the middle of a long run. So I had about 20 miles total on that day. Did 12 miles, averaging 5-minute pace on the nose, around a nice flat loop that's pretty close as far as Boulder gets to simulating the Chicago Marathon course. Felt really good that day. To me, the mindset in this period just shifts towards like, okay, this is where you're kind of simulating what the marathon after mile 20 is going to feel like on your legs. You're really tired. You've got all this fatigue accumulated from the weeks and weeks of big mileage, but you still have to run race pace and tell yourself you feel good doing it. So that's phase 2 is really just this: put your head down and get to work, grind it out, run the big mileage, run the big workouts, be tired all the time, be constantly snacking on stuff, but stay healthy and feel as good as possible doing it. And then the reward, the light at the end of the tunnel after you survive the 6-week period of big mileage and big workouts, is what everyone knows is the taper. Sometimes, almost always, when I feel the worst out of any stage of my marathon build, and sometimes it does a number on your head or your legs feel flat all the time. It's just can be a tricky period to manage, but while it's maybe not the most enjoyable part of the marathon build, it is absolutely an essential part to make sure that you are ready and fresh on race day. So for me, this is usually about a 2 to 3 week window, depending on, again, the tune-up race, the timing of that, and just overall how my body's feeling. It's never a huge drop, and I think that's also part of it too. I think mentally we hear the word taper and we're like, oh, a nice reprieve. And for me, the first week of my taper, I'm still over 100 miles per week, but it's closer to 100 instead of 115. So, you make that mental switch of like, cool, I don't have to train hard anymore, but you still do. And so it's hard to show up to a workout feeling like you're maybe not as mentally engaged as you were for those big mileage workouts, but you have to show up and give your best effort. So that's kind of the 3 phases of my build, is that initial, just kind of laying the foundation, 4 weeks of just building your long run and your mileage up. And then the middle bulk of the build, about the middle half of it, is dedicated to putting in the hard yards of training, having the 20 plus mile long runs and the big tempo workouts and things like that. And then on the back end, 3-ish weeks of freshening up and getting your legs and your mind ready to go race. So that's kind of the breakdown of what it looks like to be averaging over 100 miles per week for a 3-month marathon build. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment below, shoot me a message on Instagram. Find me however you need to find me. I'm here to answer your questions, people.